My name is Elise Moser. I am a writer and editor. I've published a couple of novels, one for grown-ups and one for teens, and most recently I published a book for kids, which is my first non-fiction book. I always considered myself a reader, and even though I always wrote stories, I never imagined that I would be a writer. I think everybody has to find their own way to writing. Really, when I went to university, all I wanted to do was read books, so I chose English Lit, and I had no idea at the time that I would ever be a writer. I spent a number of years just writing short stories, and I published about 30 of them, and I still love reading them. Ironically, I find it harder to focus on writing short stories because when you're writing a novel or a longer work, you're in it and it kind of anchors you. I think in a short story you can do some things that you can't do in a novel because you have somebody's attention. By the same token, in a novel you can do things you just don't have room to do in a short story. There are endless possibilities for both forms. Writers are like any other kind of artist. As much as you have to do the bulk of your work on your own, you need a village around you. You need supportive community, you need editors, you need publishers. In particular, in Quebec, for Anglophone writers, the Quebec Writers Federation is an incredible resource. It runs a very wide range of programming. It serves the whole community, not just writers. Anybody can be a member. But for writers, it gives us a chance to access the supportive community we need, as well as offering us all kinds of resources, workshops, and mentorships, and so on. So I would say for everybody, and certainly for me in my career, it's been incredibly important. I think I'm probably influenced by all kinds of cultural trends, but I have never been successful at planning in advance what kind of book I want to write. I start out thinking I'm doing one thing, and by the time I'm finished, it has turned out to be something quite different. What Millie Did, subtitle The Remarkable Pioneer of Plastics Recycling, is the amazing true story of Millie Zanto. She was an ordinary person in the sense that she had no particular training or background in recycling. She basically invented plastics recycling. She's the person who figured out how to make it possible for plastics recycling to be done on a large scale. She also was a kind of visionary because what she invented was the system of resin codes, which is the numbers inside the triangle on the bottom of plastic stuff. That's what made it possible to separate the different kinds of plastics on an industrial scale because they can't be melted down all together. I had never written any nonfiction before starting to work on this Millie book. I found it very hard. I don't have great research skills. When you're writing nonfiction, you have to take the facts that really exist and put them into a narrative that makes them understandable to the reader. But I felt more constrained by that than I have in fiction. It took me 3 years to write that book, and I had to keep going back and changing some of the details about plastics recycling because those areas are changing so fast that the things that I had in my first draft were not all still true in the final draft. When I started writing the Millie book, it was because that story had grabbed me and wouldn't let me go, and I think I have to wait to be grabbed again before I take on another project like that one.
What Millie Did by Elise Moser. You've probably never heard of her. She wasn't a superstar or a princess. She didn't invent life-saving medicines or the internet or candy that fizzes inside your mouth. But she did create something you probably see every day. And because of her, there's a lot less plastic garbage garbage in the world. Millie was born on an Oklahoma farm in 1923, almost 100 years ago. There were 7 kids in her family, living with their parents in a small house with only 4 rooms. As soon as Millie was old enough to talk, she went to live with her grandmother, who lived in her own little house on the farm. There, as a small child, Millie started working. Millie's grandmother kept a loom in the kitchen, the warmest room in the house, and she would weave rugs, likely from strips of old clothing, while Millie sat on a little stool, tending the warp strings so they didn't snag. While they worked together, Millie's grandma sang to her or told her stories. At that time, people reused everything they could because they had to. There was no recycling as it exists now, but people found new uses for all sorts of things at home. These days, most of us take recycling for granted. We sort our garbage, recycling, and compost at home, unless we keep the compost for our own lawns and gardens. We know the recycled stuff will be made into new objects of all kind. Your old homework might become your next birthday card. An empty olive oil bottle can be recycled into an olive jar or beautiful tiles for the kitchen. Recycled glass is sometimes mixed into road paving materials. Aluminum from a soft drink can might be made into new aluminum cans, aluminum foil, or building materials. Plastics will find new life as drainage pipes, carpeting, or recycled fabrics. Your cozy fleece jacket might be made from pop bottles. It seems obvious that we should reuse our metals, glass, and plastics by recycling them. After all, these are non-renewable materials. That means their supply is limited.